Welcome to TIRF Tips, that show that involves the Toronto Police, joined by the Traffic Injury Research Foundation. And today joining me on screen is Craig Lyon. He is the Director of Road Safety Engineering with TIRF, the Traffic Injury Research Foundation. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sean. Happy to be here.
It's great to have you, and we're talking about roundabouts today, and you know lots about roundabouts. So on the TIRF website, there's an insights page, and one of the articles is about circling back to talk about roundabouts. So let's talk about roundabouts.
Sure. So roundabouts are a bit new in North America. They're certainly popping up a lot more, but they're relatively new. A lot of jurisdictions don't have any. So, of course, with something new, there's a lot of anxiety with some people. They're not quite sure how they're used or why they're going in. So probably some listeners might be interested in, and the big question, I suppose, is why they're putting in roundabouts.
Well, I hear that they're safer, and at the same time, I see a lot of people who are just confused. They simply are confused.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's natural for something that's new. They are definitely safer, so there's a lot of research and data out there that shows that. Principally for two main reasons, or three main reasons, I suppose. The first is that when you're going through a roundabout, you have that curved entry, so it forces everyone to slow down, right? So you have the slower speeds, that's going to be safer, because when you're going faster, you have less time to perceive and react to things, your stopping distance is greater, and also your focal point, what you can actually see as you're driving fast is smaller. So just reducing the speeds makes it safer. It also makes it safer because when you do have a crash, it's typically a low severity crash. So it's someone rear-ending, or it's two vehicles as they're coming through doing a side swipe. It's a lot safer than if you're hitting someone head on or if you're going in a right angle. And then the other way they're safer is because there's a lot fewer conflict points. So when I say a conflict point, I mean where the paths overlap. So two vehicles, one's going through and one's going a left turn, for example, at a conventional intersection, or pedestrians are going across the path of a vehicle. That's a conflict point. And there's a lot fewer at a roundabout than there is a conventional intersection. So those are the main ways.
I was going to say lots of good things,
yeah.
And then it's just a matter of getting everyone to understand what everybody else is supposed to be doing in them. And my biggest issue is I find people entering a roundabout don't realize that they have to yield to the people already in the roundabout, and that's where it's sort of a game of chicken unless you're dealing with people who understand what's going on. So raising awareness, getting more people to understand the rules surrounding roundabouts, and giving them, I guess, best practices. So what are the best tips for roundabouts?
Yeah, so everyone needs to understand how to use them properly, obviously. So there's definitely an education component. There's lots of resources on the internet. If you just Google, there's documents you can read. There's videos, animations that very clearly show you what are the expectations into a roundabout. So most importantly, I think, is just to, number one would be realize that you do need to yield on an entering to a roundabout. The second was to make sure that you're in the right lane for where you want to go. So on a single lane roundabout, that's not an issue. If it's a multi-lane roundabout, then you need to be aware. And it can change depending on what the roundabout configuration is. So sometimes you have a four-lane road with a four-lane road intersecting, or a two-lane road intersecting a four-lane road. So it might differ a bit, right? So as you're entering the roundabout, typically on the pavement, there'll be some pavement markings showing you, if you're making a right-hand turn, this is the only lane that you can do it from. If you're going through or left, you need to be in these lanes. So that's very important as well. It's also important to recognize that you need to yield to all cars going through the roundabout. So if you're about to enter, if it's a two-lane roundabout, and the closest lane, there was no one in there, but there's someone in the second, you're still supposed to yield.
Really? Okay.
They might not do the right thing, right? They might cut across, and you're not supposed to change lanes within the roundabout as well. If there's an emergency vehicle coming through, don't stop within the roundabout. Always proceed outside of the roundabout, and yield to pedestrians and cyclists as well.
You mentioned something interesting. You're not supposed to change lanes within a roundabout. So if you're entering, you're continuing in the lane that you are in until there's an opportunity to exit?
That's right. So if you're making a right-hand turn, typically, you would have to be in the farthest right lane if it's a multi-lane roundabout, right? And then if you're going through, depending on the configuration, you may be able to do so from either lane entering, and the same with the left turn. So it really depends. Again, you have to look at what is being signed, whether it's a sign or a pavement marking, because we don't want people changing lanes within roundabouts. That's just going to lead to crashes.
It's funny you said, because my only experience with roundabouts in North America are generally single lane. I've not spent any time in multiple lane ones. So what you're bringing up is news to me in terms of not changing lanes within them, because I understand that generally speaking, you're in the right lane. Well, we'll just go with single lane because there's still confusion with those. But people don't realize that you have to use signals in relation to roundabouts.
That's right. So when you're approaching the roundabout to enter, you're supposed to signal if you're turning right. If you're going through, you would signal, still signal if you're making a left-hand turn. And whatever you're doing once you're inside, when you do go to exit, make a right-hand turn signal. Even if it's a multi-lane roundabout and there's 2 lanes, if you're on the inside one, you're still supposed to signal that you're exiting.
Makes sense. You always want to give a clear intention, communicate that clear intention of a movement. Otherwise, bad things can happen. You have this great infographic. You've got do's and don'ts and some great graphics to suggest pedestrian and bicycle maneuvering or traffic maneuvering through them. So how is it for pedestrians and cyclists? Is it as safe or safer?
Yeah, so for pedestrians, it would be safer. It would be safer, number one, because vehicle speeds are going to be slower. So typically how it's treated is the pedestrian crossing will be before the entry point that you would enter the roundabout, so it's some distance in front of that. So it's safer for a pedestrian because vehicles are going to be going slower. They also only need to check for vehicles coming from one way, because also typically there'd be like a little spot for them to, like a median treatment or something. So if they could cross twice at a time. So it is safer for pedestrians. Bicyclists have 2 options generally. They can act as a vehicle and go through the roundabout just like a car would, and make your signs for right-hand turn, left-hand turn, etc. Or they could dismount and use a pedestrian crossing. And some roundabouts, some jurisdictions are actually starting to put in like cycle lanes through the roundabout, similar to how you have a pedestrian crossing. So the cycling has its own spot, sort of away from vehicles. So
I've not seen any of those. That's very cool.
Yeah, perhaps more so in the United States, but I'm sure they'll be coming here as well.
These things have a wonderful way of making their way everywhere. And I grew up in Toronto. I'd never seen a roundabout. Now I'm seeing them all over the place.
No, well, mostly from Europe. That's where they were really starting, and then Australia used quite a bit as well.
No kidding. When it gets to, what do we got here? I'm just looking at your do's and don'ts list. We talked about that whole never stopping in a roundabout. It really does cause some issues. And for emergency vehicles, from a police perspective, we want you to exit, pull over after you've exited, and not right at the, I want to say the entrance point, because that's going to cause an issue for a vehicle that's trying to get up behind you. Pull up and pull over to the side, giving enough room for someone to navigate past you.
That's right. Especially large vehicles like fire trucks and things, they do need the extra room. In fact, a lot of roundabouts will have what we call it the apron, which is around the center, that center island, and they can actually traverse that a little bit because typically they're too large. And that was always a concern that some jurisdictions heard. These large vehicles couldn't get through emergency vehicles. But it's very important they have a way to do it, and you can't fix that by changing that entry angle. To allow them to go straight, because everyone goes straight, and then they're not going to slow down, right? If they can go faster, they will go faster, and you're defeating the whole purpose of having a roundabout.
And I've seen a lot of large vehicles navigate in communities that have roundabouts that drive over that center area, and it looks so wrong. And that's the only way they can get through with a large vehicle.
Absolutely.
Very cool. In terms of things that we haven't covered that you think we should cover, because there's only so much we can say that hasn't been said. We know it's safer. We have the basic do's and don'ts. Just to go over this graphic, you've got your quick list where it says only enter when safe to do so, and observe the lane signs and choose the correct entry lane. Signal when exiting the roundabout. As a cyclist, follow road rules and or dismount and use the marked crosswalk. As a pedestrian, use marked crosswalks. Maintain a low speed of 20 kilometers an hour in a roundabout. And then the do not list is don't stop in a roundabout unless flow of traffic is impeded, which is an annoying thing because the whole idea is not to stop in a roundabout. So do not pull over inside a roundabout. Instead, pull over for emergency vehicles before entering or after exiting a roundabout. Do not change lanes inside a roundabout. Do not, as a pedestrian, cut across the middle of a roundabout. That's something we didn't talk about. That's a very good point. Cross where it's intended for you to cross, and don't try and do this giant crossover. In Europe, some roundabouts could be as simple as a painted circle on the ground, whereas where I've seen them more often, they have quite a large structure, and they tend to have plants and flowers, and walking through the center is actually a bit of work.
Yes, and sometimes there's these small things that some people might call it a roundabout. It's not truly a roundabout. It's a traffic circle. It's meant just for traffic calming on little local streets. That's a little bit different. So we're talking about like a proper roundabout, which has a larger size and deflection angles and all of those types.
Okay. So let's talk about this more, because maybe what I'm describing, what I see more often are actually traffic circles than roundabouts. How big is a traffic circle?
That'd be typically just like a 2-lane by 2-lane road, like a residential area, and it may not have the same type of deflection and whatnot. It's just there meant to try and slow some speeds down, and people might be walking just across the intersection and things. But
Interesting.
A true roundabout that typically wouldn't be very attractive to do, I think, because that central island will actually be built up in some manner.
I'm now going to start questioning what I call things, because I've never heard that terminology used. It's always been roundabout, and I think I dislike them both. I love them in empty roads when no one's around, but again, I dislike them because everyone who seems to traverse them seems to be doing it incorrectly, and it frustrates me. So, what can I say?
And that's another important thing about roundabouts, is that they are safer, but they're also very good for traffic flow. And I've had that experience too. There's one by my parents' place when I drive there, and it's a rural area and it's high speed. And so it's signalized because there's a fair bit of traffic at certain times of the day. And with those speeds, you need signals to get enough gap for someone to turn on the main road. But when I'm driving there, it's not heavy traffic, and I'm sitting like a minute waiting for this light to change, and there's nobody around. So it's very inefficient for time. You're burning gas, greenhouse gases getting emitted. It's just so wasteful. But if a roundabout, it's just constant movement, and they're actually efficient. So even with like a lot of traffic, like it can handle the traffic. At some point, if the traffic is really, really high, or if it's not very balanced, if it was all really from one direction, then they don't work as well operationally. But generally, they still do work very well when space is allowed. That's the one hindrance of a roundabout. You do need more space than, say, a signalized intersection.
It really is a situation where it's only as good or as efficient as the people using it who allow others to play. Because if someone wants to be, I want to use the word selfish, and not give space, well then, if everyone does that, then no one gets to jump in, and it becomes useless. And I see that a lot. But at the same time, I have faith that we'll all figure it out and start getting places more efficiently and safer. So the graphic, which in the magic of editing I'm going to add now, is a really good resource. If people want to see this or peruse the site, it's TIRF, TIRF.ca, and under the Insights tab is where you get to all of these particular articles. And there's a whole bunch of them.
I would encourage everyone to go on the internet and just Google search how to drive a roundabout and look at the video selections. There's lots of animations and videos that would explain it very clearly. And if some people have some anxiety about how to use these things, I think that should be alleviated. And then, a little bit of practice, you'll be feeling good at no time.
That's great advice. And, we can't demonstrate it because we're not driving, and that would be weird, being on a video conference while driving. Not only weird, but it would be illegal. So, no, that's great. Well, if we can find a great video, I'll include it in the show notes so you can check it out. Thank you so much for joining me on TIRF Tips and going over roundabouts, because I think it's great information, and the more we can share with everybody, the safer we're going to be.
Great. It's my pleasure.
All the best. Take care.